Welcome to the arena. Today, I am going to present to you arguably the best GSC OU battle of 2025 so far. Today, we are going over RUBYBLOOD versus Don Eduardo, or Carapinga, or Kenix. A battle that was played as part of the Smogon Premier League, or SPL, often cited as the most prestigious tournament for both Smogon and GSC OU as a whole. The battle was played on March 16th, 2025, during Week 9 of the Smogon Premier League. Week 9 was the final week before playoffs. Going into the game, RUBYBLOOD and Don Eduardo had the same record in the tournament. 6 wins and just 2 losses. They were tied for the best record of the regular season. RUBYBLOOD and Kenix are among the most respected and powerful maestros of modern GSC. Both are adept in using various different team styles, and they have a superb ability to read the game state. With all that in mind, who is going to come out on top? Who will emerge as the player with the best record in the regular season? Let's find out. It's time for RUBYBLOOD versus Kenix. The stage has been set. On turn number 1, RUBYBLOOD sends out a Zapdos and Kenix sends out a Snorlax. There is a lot Zapdos and Snorlax can do on this turn, depending on the movesets and playstyles of their team. Zapdos often uses Thunder to dent Snorlax, and that is what Ruby goes for, only his Thunder misses. Snorlax responds with a Curse. If RUBYBLOOD is using an offensive team, this Snorlax poses a big threat, especially if it's running Earthquake. Zapdos connects with Thunder on turn 2, as Snorlax deals 69% with Double Edge. It's too dangerous for Zapdos to stay in. Ruby reveals a Forretress, taking 25% on the switch. Forretress indicates that Ruby is using a bulkier offensive team. Now, Snorlax can have Flamethrower, but Curse plus Flamethrower Snorlax has declined in usage. RUBYBLOOD feels alright chancing it. He uses Spikes, and Snorlax thankfully uses Double Edge. The fact that Kenix didn't use Earthquake on that turn means he might not have it, implying Kenix is using Curse plus Sleep Talk on his Snorlax. Forretress uses Toxic, and Snorlax uses Double Edge. Forretress is getting worn down. It's now at just 43%. Ruby switches out to Steelix, confirming that he is using a Forretress offense. Snorlax uses Rest in return. Steelix can now use Roar, revealing a bit of Kenix's team. On turn 7, he roars in a Golem. Golem doesn't want to stay in here, so Kenix switches out to Cloyster. Golem plus Cloyster is a very common core on offensive teams, though it is possible this could be a defensive team, with Pokemon like Zapdos, Blissey, or Skarmory in the back. Ruby uses this as an opportunity to get Zapdos back in. Ruby uses Hidden Power as Kenix sends in Snorlax, predicting a Ground type. Ruby decides to stay in and use Thunder. He misses another Thunder, and Snorlax reveals Sleep Talk, firing off a Double Edge that leaves Zapdos on just 2%. Ruby now knows Snorlax's full moveset. He is free to counter it with Steelix. Or his Gengar, as it turns out. By the way, Zapdos used Rest on turn 12. Kenix is using a Snorlax incapable of hurting Ghost types, so he likely has a Pursuit using Dark type in the back. Turns out, Umbreon is his Pursuit user. Umbreon is a more unexpected choice on a team like this. You would expect to see the more offensively potent Tyranitar or even Houndoom in its spot. Umbreon is a better defensive Gengar answer though. Gengar could try annoy Umbreon with Hypnosis or Dynamic Punch, but Ruby decides to not risk it. Umbreon pursues Gengar for 48% as it switches out. Ruby's Forretress is now safely on the field. It can use Rapid Spin now if it has it. Possibly anticipating a spin, Kenix sends in Cloyster, who Ruby lands a nice Toxic on, crippling its longevity. Certain Pokemon can benefit from that Toxic, including Ruby Steelix. Right now, it's too early to say who is favoured. The game could go a number of ways from this spot. Both players double out. Kenix sends in Golem and Ruby sends in Zapdos. Golem could use Rapid Spin here, but does it want to possibly take a hidden power to do so? These kinds of risks are common. Moves that could benefit you greatly, but could also lead to bad outcomes. You, the player, have to decide if they are worth taking, depending on the state of the game. Kenix decides to use Rapid Spin, only for Gengar to block it. Gengar could be using Hidden Power Water, but if Kenix switches out to Umbreon, Umbreon could get Gengar very low in HP, maybe even KO it. It's smartest for both players to swap out. Right now, things are even. Neither player needs to take big risks. On turn 19, Ruby reveals a Vaporeon, while Kenix sends in Umbreon. We now have Ruby's full team. He absolutely has Snorlax last. This is GSC OU. It's an offensive team with Forretress instead of Cloyster as the spiker. Vaporeon loves that Cloyster has been poisoned, though Kenix very likely has a Zapdos in the back. That Zapdos is revealed on turn 20, as Ruby reveals his Snorlax. Kenix's Zapdos is going to play a pivotal role in this battle. Watch and see what it ends up doing. Not right now though. Kenix sends out Umbreon to fight a cursed Snorlax, as it turns out. Umbreon can't stall this Snorlax out with Charm. However, Kenix uses Toxic, a move rarely seen on Umbreon these days. Snorlax responds with a Body Slam that doesn't paralyze. The presence of Toxic makes Charm very unlikely on this Umbreon. Umbreon uses Rest as Snorlax sets up a second curse. Now that Umbreon's asleep, it can't pursue Gengar until it wakes up. More importantly though, Kenix is in a bad spot. If this is an Earthquake Snorlax, it can run through Kenix's team. Kenix switches out to Golem, taking 25% from Body Slam. Golem is left at 62%, an Earthquake will now take it out. It's probably unwise to stay in and risk it. Kenix can switch out and Scout though, which will also rack up more poison damage. Kenix decides to risk it and switch out to Zapdos, hoping to see an Earthquake. However, Ruby calls out Kenix's bluff. He also recognized that Kenix was likely to pivot, and fires off a nasty Body Slam, leaving Zapdos with just 43%. It is critical that Body Slam didn't paralyze. The significance of no paralysis is revealed on the next turn. On turn 26, Zapdos uses Protect. Protect means this Zapdos is not using a rest set. It is more likely using its offensive Whirlwind set. Paralysis would have badly crippled Zapdos, a very useful Pokemon in this matchup. By turn 27, toxic damage has caught up to Snorlax. It now has to use Rest. Kenix can neuter Snorlax with a Roar from Golem, or he could reveal a Machamp. Machamp is Kenix's final Pokemon, a natural choice on this team. This team wants a big offensive threat last, and Machamp pairs well with Pursue Umbreon. This is a great spot for Kenix. Ruby's best answer is probably Zapdos, but Zapdos is at the mercy of Sleep Talk right now. On turn 28, Ruby switches Zapdos in as Machamp uses Curse. Machamp can now 2-hit KO Zapdos with Rock Slide, while taking 43 to 51% from Thunder. Zapdos has to both pull Thunder from Sleep Talk and actually land the move. This Machamp is a big threat. Or so it may seem. On turn 29, Zapdos hits Machamp with a critical hit Thunder that inflicts paralysis. That is terrible news for Kenix. The worst case scenario. Machamp went from a big threat to badly crippled in just one turn. On turn 31, Zapdos misses the Thunder, but Machamp gets fully paralyzed. If Machamp had landed that Rock Slide, it would have KO'd Zapdos. On turn 32, Zapdos finishes Machamp off with a Thunder. Machamp could have been a big threat, but because of bad luck, Kenix got little value out of it. This game just got much more challenging for Kenix to win. Kenix sends in Snorlax, but Ruby has two Pokemon capable of walling it. On turn 34, Cloyster loses 24% upon switching in because of poison and spikes, only to be immediately roared out. On turn 36, Zapdos reveals Hidden Power Water, dealing some good damage to Steelix. Umbreon is subsequently roared in, and Kenix decides to switch out to Cloyster, only to be immediately roared out yet again. Cloyster is now at just 21%. If Kenix switches it in, it's just going to faint to poison and spikes damage. It's pretty clear that Kenix is on the back foot. His Machamp is gone, and Cloyster is now just a sacrificial lamb. Snorlax is walled by Gengar and Steelix, and Umbreon is only a threat to Gengar. RUBYBLOOD is the favourite in this game, the one in the driver's seat. That doesn't mean it's impossible for Kenix though, it is still very much winnable. Kenix still has his Zapdos. Whirlwind Zapdos poses a major threat to Ruby's team if played well. If Kenix can play aggressively and smart with his Zapdos, he can claw this game back. If Kenix's Zapdos is paralyzed, frozen, or KO'd, Kenix is almost certainly done for. At this stage of the game, he is going to have to take a few risks. He is going to have to risk Zapdos to paralysis or freeze at some point. He has to play a little loose to stay in the game. On turn 38, Snorlax is switched into a weak Hidden Power Water. This Snorlax could be a Sleep Talk set, and a Body Slam paralysis would ruin Zapdos. Kenix decides to stay in and risk it. His risk taking is rewarded. On turn 39, Zapdos lands a critical hit Thunderbolt as Snorlax snoozes. No Sleep Talk is used. Snorlax is Ruby's best Zapdos answer, and it's now in a bad spot. Ruby switches out to Steelix, but Kenix reads that with a Whirlwind, dragging in Vaporeon. Ruby brings Steelix back in, but Zapdos can now just KO it with Hidden Power Water. This Zapdos is a humongous threat. However, it might be unable to beat itself. With Ruby's Snorlax both asleep and low on HP, his Zapdos is now the best answer to Kenix's one. Zapdos Thunderbolt deals 33 to 39% to itself, and Zapdos is immune to spikes. Ruby's Zapdos can threaten Kenix's one with both Thunder and Hidden Power Ice. A Thunder Paralysis would badly cripple Kenix's Zapdos. Ruby's Zapdos is vulnerable to critical hits, and Thunderbolt can still 3-hit KO it, but this is Ruby's best option. On turn 42, Ruby decides to switch Zapdos directly into itself, hoping that it just uses Hidden Power Water. Kenix is not messing around though, he smacks Zapdos with Thunderbolt on the switch, leaving Zapdos with just 28% HP. A terrifying reality suddenly becomes apparent to RUBYBLOOD. He must risk the entire game on a speed tie. If, on turn 43, his Zapdos goes first and uses Rest, that's great. However, if Kenix wins the speed tie, he will KO Ruby Zapdos and likely sweep the rest of RUBYBLOOD's team. There really isn't another option. Turn 43 is the pivotal turn for RUBYBLOOD. If he loses this speed tie, that is game over. RUBYBLOOD goes for Rest, praying that his Zapdos goes first. RUBYBLOOD has been saved. His Zapdos won the speed tie and managed to use Rest. That is a big pendulum swing in his favour. On turn 44, Zapdos pulls Rest from Sleep Talk as Kenix uses Whirlwind, dragging in Vaporeon. Ruby switches back to Zapdos and the exact same thing happens. Zapdos pulls Rest and Whirlwind drags in Vaporeon. Ruby goes back out to Zapdos. On turn 48, Ruby uses Sleep Talk and pulls Thunder, but no paralysis is inflicted. Kenix uses Whirlwind and drags in Steelix. Ruby once again sends in Zapdos, thankfully avoiding a Thunderbolt. It's now too risky for Kenix to stay in. He switches out to Snorlax, and then, the next turn, smacks Zapdos for 43% with Double Edge. Not wanting to lose more HP, Ruby switches out to Forretress. Now, are we going to see Rapid Spin? Turns out, nah. Forretress hits Golem for 17% with a hidden power. Rapid Spin would have been fantastic, but I think it's clear by now that Ruby doesn't have the move. Speaking of Rapid Spin, Golem can use it now too. There are mind games involved though. Should Kenix use Earthquake to snipe a Gengar switch? Kenix decides to use Earthquake. That plan backfires as Ruby switches out to Zapdos. On turn 55, Golem is dead to a hidden power ice, but Kenix decides to risk it and he uses Rapid Spin. This time, Ruby switches out to Gengar as Golem uses Rapid Spin. Golem is now forced out. Kenix switches out to Umbreon, who remember, can't pursue Gengar while asleep. This Umbreon is really passive. Ruby can send in anything except Gengar against it and use it to recover some HP. Kenix is a smart player though. He recognizes this fact and double switch to Zapdos as Ruby sends in Snorlax. Zapdos can KO Snorlax before it wakes up. Ruby switches out to Steelix, hoping to bait a hidden power for Zapdos. His efforts are rewarded, but Kenix can still 2-hit KO his Zapdos with Thunderbolt. He either needs to pull Rest from Sleep Talk, or possibly risk another speed tie. On turn 60, Ruby Zapdos uses Rest, recovering its HP. On turn 61, Kenix fires off another Thunderbolt, but Ruby yet again pulls Rest. On turn 63, Ruby sends in Steelix, who, after taking so much spikes damage, is now at just 14%. Ruby can still get some use out of Steelix though. Snorlax, Umbreon and Golem don't want to take it on, and Zapdos could be destroyed by Explosion. Steelix uses Curse. Snorlax is unable to threaten it. Steelix can now claim a KO with Explosion. On turn 65, Kenix sends in Umbreon, who can't do anything to Steelix. Steelix can just stay in and use Earthquake, recovering its HP with leftovers. There are mind games involved though. If, on turn 66, Ruby uses Earthquake as Kenix sends in Zapdos, the threat of Steelix is neutralized. However, if Steelix booms Zapdos on the switch, Kenix loses his most valuable Pokemon. Turn 66 is going to be pivotal. Kenix is likely to lose something to this Steelix. Let us see what the players end up doing. Kenix stays in and uses Sleep Talk, pulling Rest, while Ruby uses Explosion, destroying Kenix's Umbreon. RUBYBLOOD tried to blow up a Zapdos switch, but instead he took down Umbreon. Now that Umbreon's gone, Kenix has a serious problem with RUBYBLOOD's Gengar. Snorlax is unable to hurt Ruby's Gengar. Zapdos and Golem are both weak to Ice Punch. Kenix has to stop Gengar from gaining entry, but with Snorlax unable to damage it, that's going to be tricky. Gengar is, at least, now weak enough to be KO'd by a Thunderbolt. On turn 67, Kenix sends in Snorlax and Ruby sends in Zapdos. Ruby promptly switches to his Gengar. Gengar now has a free turn. It can do whatever it pleases. Kenix begrudgingly decides to send Zapdos in. On turn 68, Gengar hits Zapdos for 45% with an Ice Punch. Now that Steelix is gone, Gengar is his best answer to Kenix's Snorlax. RUBYBLOOD could just KO Zapdos with Explosion or Destiny Bond, but then RUBYBLOOD could lose to Snorlax. Also, Zapdos has Protect. Sacrificing Gengar to stop Zapdos is a risk, and not one RUBYBLOOD feels like taking. He switches out to Zapdos, only to have Gengar dragged back in by Whirlwind. Ruby goes back out to Zapdos, but Kenix once again drags in Gengar. Gengar is now at just 33%. RUBYBLOOD once again goes back out to Zapdos, taking a Thunderbolt this time. By the 70s, Zapdos is running low on Sleep Talk. By turn 72, Zapdos has just 4 Sleep Talks left. Once Zapdos runs out of Sleep Talk PP, it is a sitting duck while asleep. It is no longer a reliable answer to Kenix's Zapdos. For now though, it's still risky for Kenix to stay in. On turn 72, Zapdos uses Sleep Talk and it pulls Thunder, but Kenix once again dodges Paralysis, dragging in RUBYBLOOD's Forretress kicking and screaming. Now, unless Ruby wants to risk another speed tie, he needs to sacrifice something. Something needs to go so Zapdos can switch in safely. It's pretty clear that Snorlax now won't have the opportunity to wake up and do stuff. RUBYBLOOD decides to let Snorlax go. Before KOing Snorlax, Kenix uses Protect for some leftovers recovery. Snorlax is finished off and Zapdos is brought back in. On turn 76, Kenix uses Protect as RUBYBLOOD wakes up and uses Thunder. The Thunder that Kenix's Zapdos took has made an impact. Zapdos is now weak enough to be KO'd by 2 attacks from both Gengar and Ruby Zapdos. Kenix switches to Snorlax, taking a Thunder on the switch. Snorlax is at 65%. It wants to be careful around Zapdos. If it uses Rest, however, it's going to just let Gengar in. On turn 78, Gengar is switched in. Snorlax does not use Rest. Kenix now needs a sacrifice. The clear choice is Cloyster. Cloyster perishes while trying to switch in. Zapdos now has an entry. Zapdos smacks its Ditto with Thunderbolt on the switch, forcing Ruby to use Rest. On turn 82, Kenix is yet again presented with a choice. Stay in and risk Paralysis, or switch out to Snorlax. At this point, Golem is the only potential sacrifice he has left. He cannot forfeit turns to Gengar by switching to Snorlax. Kenix decides to stay in and use Whirlwind. Once the dust settles, Zapdos is unparalyzed. That is the 4th paralysis this Zapdos has dodged. Kenix's Zapdos drags in Forretress, but the bird is now below 30%. Ruby, Zapdos and Gengar can both finish it off with a single move. RUBYBLOOD needs a safe switch in though. RUBYBLOOD needs to sacrifice his Forretress. Zapdos and Gengar are pivotal, and Vaporeon can pose a threat if Kenix loses his Zapdos. Kenix destroys Forretress, and RUBYBLOOD sends in Zapdos. The game is now a 3v3, and a damn close one at that. Kenix is playing his ass off. He really wants to bring this game home. On turn 84, Kenix uses Protect, gaining a bit of leftovers recovery, though not enough to survive another Thunder. Kenix switches to Snorlax, taking a hidden power on the switch. It is now turn 86. Zapdos Thunder has a 62% chance to 2-hit KO a Snorlax at 53%. RUBYBLOOD has put Kenix in a position where he wants to play defensive and use Rest, but that'll give Gengar a free turn. Recognizing that, he makes an incredible play. Kenix double switches out to Zapdos, stopping Gengar from stepping all over him. RUBYBLOOD Zapdos only has one more Sleep Talk PP left. RUBYBLOOD is running out of time. On turn 87, Ruby switches Zapdos in, but Kenix drags in Gengar with Whirlwind. RUBYBLOOD has to make a choice. Should he try KO Zapdos with Explosion in a bid to win with Vaporeon, or should he go back to Zapdos? Ruby has to risk his Explosion thudding into a Protect. An Acid Armor Vaporeon will easily win if Zapdos is eliminated, but a Vaporeon without Acid Armor is far from guaranteed to beat Snorlax. This is a decisive turn for both players. Let's see what their moves were. Gengar assassinates Kenix's Zapdos with Explosion. After basically carrying Kenix's team, Zapdos finally falls. Kenix's Snorlax has been enabled. RUBYBLOOD has no more normal resistant or immune Pokemon. Kenix can still lose though. Growth boosted Surfs do make Snorlax sweat. Snorlax can suffer critical hits, or it could pull the wrong moves from Sleep Talk at the wrong times. On turn 89, Vaporeon uses Growth and Snorlax uses Curse. Kenix breathes a sigh of relief, as Vaporeon did not use Acid Armor, but he is still in a tricky spot. Vaporeon can now two-shot Snorlax with Surf. If Kenix uses Rest, he forfeits a setup turn and is then at the mercy of Sleep Talk. Vaporeon can use this as an opportunity to set up further. Both players must act based on what they guess the opponent will do. If RUBYBLOOD anticipates a Rest, he should use Growth. If he anticipates a Curse, he should use Surf. Both players really take their time weighing options on this turn. Kenix's move timer in particular goes down to the wire. It's left with just 5 seconds left. If that timer runs out, he loses. Just put yourself in the minds of the players. You are here at the end of an exhausting and intense game, given little time to make such important decisions, with hundreds of people watching live. Hundreds of people dying to see the next move. Speaking of the player's move, Vaporeon uses Growth and Snorlax uses Curse. Kenix banked the entire game on Vaporeon using Growth, and it paid off. Snorlax's boosted Double Edge will now KO Vaporeon, though Kenix has to use Rest on this turn. It's starting to look worrisome for RUBYBLOOD. He needs to get some luck. On turn 91, Vaporeon uses Surf and Snorlax uses Rest. Now with Snorlax at full HP, non-critical hit Surf at best 3-hit KOs it. Because of leftovers, Double Edge now has a 66% chance to KO Vaporeon. Kenix needs to think about Zapdos too. Snorlax may be able to beat Vaporeon, but then Zapdos could finish it off if Vaporeon leaves it low enough. Vaporeon uses Surf, praying for some luck. RUBYBLOOD is down to his final Pokemon. The Zapdos that has repeatedly given Kenix crap and stood firmly in his way is the final enemy he must face. The combination of Surf and Double Edge recoil has left Snorlax in a weakened state. Zapdos' Thunder can now 2-hit KO Snorlax. Snorlax, in return, is very unlikely to KO Zapdos. If RUBYBLOOD lands 2 consecutive Thunders and Snorlax fails to pull the right move, RUBYBLOOD wins. Golem is too weak to stop Zapdos. One hidden Power Ice will finish it off. Neither player can really control the outcome now. It all comes down to Thunder accuracy and Sleep Talk. And with that, it's looking like Kenix has won. Zapdos' Thunder is at best a 4-hit KO on Snorlax, if it even lands. The odds are now overwhelmingly in favour of Kenix. Finally, after such an exhausting and intense game, it appears victory is here. However, RUBYBLOOD has one more trick up his sleeve. We are now in a spot very similar to turn 93. If RUBYBLOOD lands 2 consecutive Thunders and Kenix pulls the wrong move, RUBYBLOOD wins. Things are better for Kenix this time though. Because Snorlax pulled Curse on turn 94, its Double Edge will now 1-hit KO Zapdos. It all comes down to Thunder accuracy and Sleep Talk. Snorlax hasn't forgotten what this Zapdos did though. It hasn't forgotten all the luck it's gotten, and especially not what it did to Kenix's Machamp. Whether this subconsciously affects what move Snorlax pulls from Sleep Talk must be seen to be believed. And with that, Kenix emerges victorious. Snorlax pulled Double Edge and KO'd Zapdos, surviving the recoil damage on just 1%. That was an incredible game to watch. Both players played incredibly well, especially Kenix. Kenix played his ass off, staging a successful comeback after Machamp got so unlucky. RUBYBLOOD also did very well, consistently keeping up the pressure and staying focused. Kenix only barely won this game. There were so many turns where he could have lost everything. In the end, Kenix emerged the victor, not only of this game, but of the regular season. He ended the regular season with 7 wins and just 2 losses. This was the best game of the most recent SPL. It was a close, exciting, and most importantly, delightful battle.